Dear friends,
Thank you.
dear friend, welcome to this program on Meet the Legends. So we will be waiting for people to join and then we will start this program. Dear friend, welcome to this program on Meet the Legends. So Alembic has always tried to be very academic in its pursuit, and we have been doing this program of Meet the Legends with various masters in various fields of ENT. We started with Professor Jayakumar Menon, who did the first Meet the Legends, and it was watched by around 15,000 people across the world. So I keep telling that conducting workshops, conducting conferences is now going to be on the decline, because we are not going to have people who are going to come all the way from various parts of the country, various parts of the world, and attend a talk show, right? That way. It's going to be now web-based teaching. And that is why we started this 1 year back. And all the Meet the Legends have been watched by more than 10,000 people across the world. We really take pride in bringing this program to you at your doorstep. You can watch this sitting back at home, and you can get the knowledge which you will get by going to any international conference. And we always select the masters in the field. So today we're going to have a true master, a master who is actually beyond definition by words, a master in this field who is the pioneer in many ways. I'm going to tell you in what ways he's a pioneer. And we are really privileged to have Professor Padma Shri Mohan Kameswaran. So, Padma Shri Mohan Kameswaran sir, welcome to this webinar.
Thank you, Janaki. Thank you. It's a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to introduce Professor Padma Shri Mohan Kameswaran sir. First of all, I want to introduce him as my teacher. So I feel proud to say that I am his student during my MS, and he used to come to Madras Medical College to take lectures, or I used to go to his, his nursing home and his institute to learn. So I'm going to brief you about his some of his achievements. Actually, if I start telling all his achievements, that will become a program on the whole. It will become like 1.5 hour program. So I'm just going to tell you the salient features and salient achievements which he has. Now, Professor Padma Shri Dr. Mohan Kameswaran is the Managing Director of Madras ENT Research Foundation. This is from Chennai. So for those of you who are watching across the globe, Chennai is down south. It's the southern state of Tamil Nadu. I'm sure many of you would have searched it by now, the foreign people. So Professor Mohan Kameswaran is got his master's from Madras Medical College, and then he did his fellow from the Royal College of Edinburgh. After that, he became a professor in the Middle East. It's not very easy to get a professor post in the Middle East. Usually you become a specialist or maybe a consultant, but he was appointed directly as a professor in the Middle East, where he headed the department. We are lucky that he came back to India I'm really thankful to him because he chose to serve his mother nation. And after he came back to India, he has done several firsts in various fields. I'm going to read it out because the list is very long, so I may not be able to remember all that. So he is a pioneer in the field of cochlear implant. So today's topic is going to be implantable hearing devices. So it's going to include cochlear implant, brainstem implants and all. So he's going to talk about everything. But then why we have chosen Professor Mohan Kameswaran. So the reason is he has been the pioneer in the field of cochlear implant in India. He was the first to do cochlear implantation in the state of Tamil Nadu, the state where I am. He was the first to do the cochlear implant program. He has done more than 3,000 cochlear implants. So that is not an easy number to have, 3,000 cochlear implants. He was the first to do the brainstem implant in Asia Pacific. So the whole region, he was the first to do the brainstem implant. So totally implantable hearing devices, first to do in Asia. He was the first to do bilateral simultaneous implant. And he was the first to do electroacoustic stimulation. He was the first to do a perimodular electrode in India. So there was nobody who has done it before him. So the Indian government decided to honor him with the highest honor, and that is the Padma Shri. And he is a Padma Shri. He got the Padma Shri award in 2006. And in 2008, he got the BC Roy Award. He also, this time I had been to Atlanta, America, and the Americans and the whole world decided to select him as the Best International Humanitarian Award. I witnessed it. I was sitting in the audience. I felt so proud that my teacher is getting that. So he is the Regional Secretary for Asia for IFOS. He is the member of Board of Governors of Pulitzer Society and Asia Pacific, and he heads the National Academy of Medical Sciences in India, which is the highest body in India. So he's a visiting professor of the Royal College of Royal Society of Medicine. Okay, to tell something about his publications, he has published more than 170 papers in international journals. He has guided 2 PhDs. So the first attempt, he made the first attempt in the world to start peripheral habilitation units. So he has got habilitation units throughout the state, and this was recognized as a role model by the WHO, World Health Organization, and it has been accepted now as a model in WHO. So he was invited to WHO to address the World Health Assembly. Now to tell something about his center. So many people would have listened to all his accolades, achievements, but you will be now inquisitive to know where he is, and would you like to get a fellowship with him, or would you like to send some cochlear implants to him, because he's the best in India and of course in Asia. So he heads the Madras ENT Research Foundation. You can put it on Google and you will get it. So he's got the first center which was recognized by the NABH. So the foreigners might not know about it. Dr. Neeraj is watching from Nepal. We have also Dr. John Bennett from Miami. It is his birthday. Wish you a very happy birthday, Professor John. And I'm sure that you will be transmitting this live to various countries from America. So he has got the first NABH accredited center in the state, and he offers DNB. It is the oldest DNB center. That is a degree given by the Indian government. So he offers the DNB, the oldest center. But tell something about his personal life also. He's a happily married person. He's got 2 children, a son and a daughter, both of them living in America, and both of them are PhDs. And both of them are, the lion son will always be like a lion. So they are all genius in their own fields. And I want to just also tell you, because many of you are seeing, if you want to contact him, you have his email ID, which I will be posting to you. Now, this itself, I think I have to cut short, Professor, because your biodata runs in pages, in volumes. In fact, I have to write a biography about you. So we will start the program without much ado, and on implantable hearing devices. I'm sure this is going to reach out to all across the world, the postgraduates mainly. And I just want to have a small request. If it's going to be very interactive, many people might ask questions. I might stop you to ask questions if you don't mind. And we can start now, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janki, for that very, very kind words of introduction. I think if anything I have to say about my achievements, I think the best achievement is people like you, my students who are spread all over and who are exceptional and who are doing far, far better. And I think that's really the greatest pride that I have. I take great pride in that. Let me also wish John Bennett a very happy birthday and many, many happy returns of the day. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Please feel free to stop me anytime or ask me questions. It would be very nice if it's interactive. So I'm going to be talking about a general overview of the implantable hearing technology which exists today, and also perhaps a little bit about some of the future directions. But it's a bit of a tricky thing to be predicting the future, especially in this field. But we can probably look at the near future, about what's actually happening now and maybe in the immediate future. Now, there's no doubt that there has been a revolution in technology in this field, and this has resulted in very substantial developments in the habilitation of the hearing impaired, whatever the type of hearing loss, be it sensorineural, cochlear, or retrocochlear, or in fact even conductive and mixed hearing loss. And I think the introduction of implants was a real milestone. It represents a fundamental philosophy in managing hearing loss. Till implants came, we were actually basically tinkering with damaged organ, trying to repair it. But with the introduction of implants, there's been a shift in philosophy now. So rather than mend diseased organs, we are now looking at bypassing them or indeed replacing them. So this is, I think, a very fundamental shift which is happening in many fields in medicine as a whole. And we were one of the pioneers in this shift in philosophy in otology. I think, the 21st century will be remembered as a century of auditory neural processes, because this is the first successful attempt to introduce a bionic device and integrate an external circuit with a very complex circuitry of the central nervous system, the human brain. And it's no mean achievement, if you really think about it in a very large philosophical sense. This is one of the most fundamental developments and achievements that we've been able to achieve, and perhaps the first step to the future bionic man. In fact, there's a very interesting, anecdote which is often said, that when Bill Clinton was in the White House, he had the habit of having breakfast sessions with intellectuals. In one such session, he had with the American Academy of Medicine, mainly physicians. And he posed a question to them. He asked them what, in their view, was the most important development which had happened in the last 2 decades. And after a lot of soul searching and scratching the head, eventually they all said cochlear implants. And that is surprising coming from physicians. It's not a small thing. So the reason they said that was because that's, I think, the first successful attempt by humans to, introduce an implant which would bionically replace a lost special sense. So in many ways, this is a very important, and it's a very highly charged field where there's so much of new information and research which is constantly coming forth. Uh, and I think one of the greatest gifts that the intelligent ever received was the auditory brain. This is, I think, evolution's gift to the autologist. And it's largely because the way the auditory brain is organized. If you look at the brain as a whole and see how it functions, it's very interesting because the best way to describe the function of the brain is that it is an organized chaos. It's an oxymoron, it's a contradictory term, but there it is. That's the way the brain generally functions. Follows a principle or a theorem which is known as the Bayesian theorem. It's named after Reverend Thomas Bayes, who actually put forth this in 1700s. It basically says that the probability of an event occurring is basically influenced by the past events which have happened about that event. In other words, there is a memory system which we try to copy and that's the way the brain functions. And there's no better example than vision, actually, because we perceive the environment, the world around us in 3D, but do not forget that the actual images in the retina are 2D. So there's a reconstruct going on, and this is based on the Bayesian theorem because we know that, from past experience, that a bottle is a cylinder. So therefore, even though it's a 2D image, we project the 3D into the brain and into the environment. So this is the way the brain functions. The one exception to the chaos in the brain is the auditory brain, where the entire auditory system is so beautifully organized by the tonotopic system, wherein there is a particular pitch which is associated with a particular place. And this generally starts off from the cochlea, where it is beautifully exemplified, where you have a very nice place pitch arrangement. And interestingly, this is continued throughout the auditory system, whether it is the midbrain, the brainstem, the midbrain, whether it's the cortex, primary auditory cortex, or even secondary auditory cortex, you have this pitch principle functioning, or the tonotopicity functioning. It is because of this that we've been able to take advantage and introduce implants, because theoretically, if you have an interruption of the auditory system at any point, then it behoves us, it's possible for us to go a step further beyond that interruption. And if we can restore the stimulation into the auditory pathway, we can, in principle, restore the sensation of hearing. So this has been a great boon for us, and it's actually underlined the way we have been developing our implants. Do not forget for a moment that no matter how sophisticated our implants are, whatever the implant, no matter how how much we brag about it, or companies brag about it, obviously, the actual processing that happens in these implants is really pathetic when compared to the actual processing happening in the cochlea, the human cochlea. The human cochlea is a wonder. It's an amazingly intricate structure which has the ability to refine and to analyze a whole range of pitches and look at the fine structure of sound and speech and music. But this is, a far cry from the current strategies we have or we employ. Admittedly, they're doing their job, but we still have a very long way to go before we can actually catch up with the human cochlea. So let's look at the implants now as a whole. If you can look at the implants, basically, you can look at them as active implants or passive implants. And I like to call them as intelligent implants and not so intelligent implants. The active implants are pretty intelligent, and that's why they are quite different from the other implants. Like say, for example, the orthopedic implants. You have a hip implant or a knee implant. They are stupid implants. Basically they are mechanical implants. But the auditory implants are very intelligent implants because they have to actually give information which is palatable to the brain, and the brain has to accept it and then make sense out of it. So they have to be by necessity very, it's a big challenge there, but these implants are very, very refined in their purpose. So if you look at the cochlear implants, the brainstem implants, auditory brainstem implants, and the whole lot of implants, we'll go through them. And the passive implants are basically just vibrators. And these are implants which vibrate into the bone and conduct sound via the skull into the cochlea. Now, if you look at the spectrum of management, this is a rather busy slide. I do apologize for that, but this is a kind of an overview. Now, if you're looking at mild sensorineural hearing loss, most of us would sort of, just give hearing aids. And now, no doubt the hearing aids also come of age. They've really become very sophisticated. They've got so many new technologies incorporated. But, they are basically, if you look at the fundamental purpose, they are amplifiers of sound. And if you have moderate or moderately severe hearing loss, then you have hearing aids which do the job. But you can also have other choices. You can have a totally implantable hearing device like the Envoy Esteem or the Autologix Carina, or you can have a bone anchored system or a vibrant sound bridge. If you go to severe to profound hearing loss, then you start looking at the whole range of middle ear implants, totally implantable hearing devices. The vibrant sound bridge is probably the most successful implant. And then we move on to profound hearing loss, where we are now using cochlear implants more and more. In mixed hearing loss, we use the vibrant sound bridge. The CDAX actuator is actually also showing a lot of promise. And when we have specialized types of hearing loss, like the ski slope program, we'll talk about it later, then the electroacoustic hearing comes into play. So we're now looking at passive implants. Are you with me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir. Very well.
Right. Now, looking at passive implants. Now, so I'm starting off with the not so very intelligent implants, so let's start off with that. The bone anchored hearing aids, they are actually quite interesting because they combine a concept of osseointegration with bone conduction. And sound is conducted through the skull, bypassing the outer and middle ear, and directly goes into the cochlea. So it's a very direct stimulation of the cochlea. And this has been quite successful now. We have a whole range now. The most successful, of course, is the BAHA, or the bone anchored hearing aid. But we also have the Orticon Ponto medical system. And we also have, and these are all percutaneous, they go through the skin. But more recently, we have started developing implants which cause bone conduction, which are transcutaneous, just like cochlear implants. They have an intact skin with a part of the implant system under the skin and part of it externally. So there are obvious advantages because in tropical countries like ours, having a percutaneous implant going through the skin has its own challenges. There's a lot of skin-related issues. There's a lot of excoriation, ulceration, and so on. Many patients are very unhappy with the skin reaction and so on. And there's a lot of sweating. And although there's no doubt it's very effective in sound conduction, these issues can be a bit of a nuisance for patients. So the transcutaneous implants have now slowly come in, and this includes the cochlear Baha tract and the Sophono. These are all very effective. They have intact skin solutions. So looking at the Baha, it's a very simple concept, really. It is a titanium fixture which is fixed onto the skull, and there is an abutment which is added onto the titanium screws, and there can be a detachable sound processor which will connect to this abutment and therefore transmit sound. It picks up the sound and it processes and gives it to the skull directly and onto the cochlea. The Baha Connect is a percutaneous implant we talked about already. And so, who are the patients who actually need it? Any patient who has a conductive or a mixed hearing loss, and unilateral cochlear hearing loss is also added on as an indication. Uh, Classically, patients with congenital oral atresia are probably the best group. Also, patients who have a chronic leaking ear, who do not, it will not settle down with repeated treatment, surgeries, and so on. There are some people who have this constant oozing ears, where they cannot wear a hearing aid. They just cannot tolerate a hearing aid. Or some of them have very sensitive skins with external otitis, and you put a hearing aid, and immediately they start weeping. Uh, Patients with single-sided deafness are a different category. In fact, in this group, now more and more we are looking at cochlear implants. But it's there's a bit of a trade-in. Cochlear implants give true hearing because you are giving hearing through the ipsilateral cochlea into the cochlear nerve and so on. But sometimes it may not be possible. For example, you have, let's say, a person who's had an acoustic tumor removed. He may not have a cochlear nerve. So in this situation, you cannot put a cochlear implant. But if you give a bone conduction device on that side, what it does is it picks up sound from that side, routes it through the skull, and hitchhikes on the opposite cochlea. So here is clearly a situation where it's not true hearing, it's false hearing, but you are nevertheless hearing on the side that you are deaf. So what it helps is it helps to get over the head shadow effect. But it's not true hearing because it does not really help with directionality and certainly not with the squelch effect. So these are special effects which are very, very integral to binaural hearing. And for that, you really need to give true hearing on that side. So therefore, cochlear implants are probably a better option in that situation. Now, what are the contraindications? Now, you can't really do a bone conduction if you do not have good hearing, on the this side or the opposite ear. So if you have a bone conduction threshold which is really poor, very bad, less than say 60 decibels, and particularly if the speech discrimination is very poor, then putting in a bone conduction device doesn't make sense. It doesn't really help. Of course, you have today, test devices where you can have a Baha band which you can put on the patient and give him a trial before you do that. And if he benefits, then you know that this person is going to benefit from a bone conduction device. And generally, we take children who are more than 4 to 5 years. Now, this is a small video clip of a child who had a complete meatal atresia. You can see the surgery. It's really quite simple. I made a cruciate incision of the periosteum, lift it up, and then you see the titanium fixture going in. And this is, it may be done in 2 stages, or it may be done in 1 stage. So once you have got the fixture in, then you can have the abutment put in. And once the abutment stays in place, then you close up the skin and allow it to heal. And later on, you can have the sound processor which can be attached to it. So it's a very simple surgery, which is really, it can even be done as an outpatient procedure. In fact, there are many centers which will do it as an outpatient or a day procedure. and send the patient home the same day. It's an office procedure. The Oticon Ponto is also a very similar device. And nowadays, as I said, the transcutaneous devices are coming in where you have an intact skin and you have a bone conduction device on the skull, and externally, by a magnet, it connects on to the sound processor, connects on to the implant. So this is the Baha Attract, and this is a recent, well, not so recent, but in the last couple of years, it's slowly becoming more and more popular. And the Sophono is also a very similar transcutaneous device.
Professor,
Sorry.
Can I interrupt for a question, please?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, there is Dr. Minish Juvika from Bombay who is asking a question. Sir, in your experience, is a hypertrophic scar the most common problem?
Yes, the hypertrophic scar is a problem.
In Baha.
I won't say it's the most common problem, but it's a problem. The most common problem really in Baha is a VP skin, because the skin excoriation, which a lot of people complain about, particularly in very humid environments like Mumbai or Chennai, sea coast, coastal areas. It's very common. Many of these people have problems with skin care, so it needs a lot of skin care, and that's really. But hypertrophic scar, as Minesh asked, is a very definite problem. It does cause a lot of problem in a lot of people, and may need some scar revisions. So next one we need to talk about is the active bone conduction implant. This is actually a more recent development, and it was introduced by Jeff Ball, the innovator who actually also developed the vibrant sound bridge, and he himself was a recipient of the bone bridge himself. Jeff Ball actually used the vibrant sound bridge idea to make it a little bigger, the warp, and make it bigger and make it into a bone conduction device which could vibrate in the skull. So it has an implanted transducer, which is an active component, and is combined with audio processor, just like in a cochlear implant, which connects by a transcutaneous radio frequency stimulation. So this is the, it has a rather fanciful shape, like a Star Wars, aircraft. But this rounded cylindrical thing that you see here is the actual vibrator, and this is the receiver, which is under the skin. So it's currently used, approved for use in adults, but we have started using it now in children over 5 years of age, where a well is drilled into the mastoid, typically, to house the implant. But sometimes the mastoid may not be possible, either because it's previously been invaded, or there is a very contracted mastoid, or situation. So there are other options that you can think of. You can think of the next most common option is a retrosigmoid placement. And although I know a couple of friends who actually put it very close to the middle fossa dura, in contact with the middle fossa dura. So there are different placements that you can employ, but the bone conduction FMT, as it is known, is completely under the skin. And an external processor connects by magnet across the skin, and it transmits the stimulation. So here is a very brief video to just show the highlights, where you can see now that the muscle and the periosteum is being elevated. It's a very, very simple procedure. And once you've done that, you create a pocket, and you have this the dummy which you can introduce to create the location for it, a convenient location. And this is the actual model for the vibrator, which goes onto the mastoid or into the skull. You can plan it out. There's also a software which the company provides, where you can actually plan out the placement in the CT scan prior to the surgery. So a nice well is dug in right up to the dura, leaving a small bit of bone over the dura, and you can place the dummy of the implant and see how well it sees. If the skull is thin and you really are in danger of going to the dura, exposing the dura is not a problem, really. In fact, there's even a couple of papers which suggest that contact with the dura actually improves the performance, although I'm not too sure about it. But if there is a gap, then you can use lips, and these lips will fill the gap between the device and the skull. So you can have different length screws and lips to also help you to fix it. But the idea is that you want it to be fixed to the bone of the skull, and the FMT to be on this in the skull, embedded in the skull, so it can vibrate and transmit the vibrations. And these titanium screws are fixed, and they eventually will get integrated, osseointegrated, so that this becomes a permanent arrangement. So this is the actual placement. The receiver stimulator is then also put into the pocket, and it nicely be seated, and you can have the external speech processor which will be connected by magnet. And this is a device for tightening the screws, where you can actually measure the torque, and you can look at the torque that you're applying. So the exact amount of pressure can be given. So this is a fairly simple surgery. Now, coming on to the active medullary implants, this is a whole new topic actually, and it's a very interesting topic actually. Not just because of the implants, but because of it makes us understand the human hearing better, especially the medullary mechanism.
So, Professor, can I stop you for a minute?
Yes.
So we have some very good viewers from Nigeria, from various parts of the world. Very happy. Welcome, Miken and everybody. We have a question for Professor Mohan from Dr. Santosh. Is Baha MRI compatible?
Is Baha MRI compatible? See, we need to qualify this question, because many companies will tell you they are MRI compatible. You must understand what is MRI compatible. Most of them are compatible to up to about 1.5 Tesla. But when you say compatible, what you accept is that they will throw a big shadow, a fairly big shadow. So if you are actually looking at a lesion very close to an implant, be it a Baha or a cochlear implant, whatever, then this will be completely shadowed by the implant. But if the lesion you're looking for is far away from the device, then the shadow will not be obscuring the findings. But when you say compatible, what you're talking about is that it can actually go into the MRI machine and come out, without needing to be taken out. So up to 1.5 Tesla, most of these implants today are compatible. But that's not to say that they will not obscure the view of a lesion, particularly if the lesion is in proximity to the implant. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Please, Kelly.
Now, when you're looking at the medullary implants, there are two basic principles by which all medullary implants function. They could either function, most of them do function, by electromagnetic coupling, and some of them by piezoelectric coupling. So they are completely different, and the way they function is totally different. So we need to understand what we mean by that. So basically, in a piezoelectric coupling, what happens is, when we say piezoelectricity, what happens is that when a crystal is bent, it produces electricity. And similarly, when electricity is passed to a crystal, some of these crystals will bend. And this is predictable. The amount of charge that you apply will determine the extent of distortion. So basically, when a crystal is subjected to electricity, it will undergo distortion. And this depends on which crystal you're using. And vice versa, when that crystal is distorted, it produces a charge. So this is known as piezoelectricity. In fact, every one of us produces piezoelectricity in our cochlea every day, every minute, as we listen to sounds. This is how the head produces electricity. It is by piezoelectric phenomenon. The amount of electricity that we produce is phenomenal, in fact. It's been calculated that if you can tap the electricity produced by all humans across the globe in a single day, we would have enough energy to solve the energy crisis for the next 100 years. That's how much electricity we produce. It's phenomenal. But yet, we have not been able to replicate this in the lab outside there. There are umpteen, hundreds of researchers who are trying to replicate piece electricity in the lab outside. Because we can do that, then we have solved the energy crisis. But it's not impossible. So this is the wonder again of the cochlea. How we produce a piece of electricity every minute, day in and day out. But coming back to piece of electricity, so if you can actually distort a crystal, this crystal will produce an electrical charge, and vice versa. Electromagnetic coupling, we all know, is based on the principle that whenever there is an electric charge, there is a magnetic field created. So now the vibrant sound bridge is probably the most successful middle ear active implant. It's a partially implantable hearing device, by which we mean that there is an external component which is visible outside. And it has an electromagnetic transducer which uses a vibrating oscillator processes or a warp. And this is typically attached to a part of the oscillator chain, usually either the long process of the incus or the lenticular process of the incus or the stapes suprastructure. Nowadays, of course, there are also the options, particularly in cavities, where you've done a canal wall down previously. It has been shown by Professor Coletti, in fact, he was the one who did it first from Verona, that you could put the ward against the round window, what is known as round window vibroplasty, or even in the old window plate, and you would have excellent hearing in these patients. So it also functions very well. The challenge, of course, is to keep the ward against the round window membrane and keep it in position there without moving. So, but the usual placement is either to the long process or the lenticular process of the incus or onto the stapes head. The biggest advantage of the vibrant sound bridge is that you have nothing in the ear. So you have a speech processor, just like in a cochlear implant, by the side of the skull, and there's nothing going into the ear. So people who have very sensitive, ear canal skin, people who have problems with having a device. There are some people who just can't tolerate a hearing aid in the ear because of the occlusal effect. They feel very disturbed when something is put into the ear. So such people, it gives very good hearing, and in fact, the quality of hearing in a vibrant sound bridge is comparable or sometimes even superior to what you can get with a hearing aid. So it's a very successful device. Generally indicated for moderately severe to severe cochlear loss, as well as to mixed hearing loss, but you have to have a good speech discrimination, at least of 50% or more. And you cannot do it for, obviously, for retrocochlear pathology. So this is a small video just to show how the device functions. So this is the device going in through a posterior tympanotomy, and you can see the warp attached to the long process, the lenticular process, and causing vibration of the oscillator chain. So, so this is a surgical video, just to show how this is done. It's a very brief video, just to show the highlights. First we elevate the drum, a posterior tympanotomy is done, and here you can see the warp attached to the lenticular process, going through a posterior tympanotomy, and then a little bit of cartilage reinforcement, and the drum is replaced. Now coming to the really interesting bit, which is the holy grail of otology, as I call it, which is a totally implantable hearing device, where there's nothing seen outside. Everything is inside the skin. So the person looks absolutely normal, but he's got an implant in the middle ear. So this is everybody's everybody's vision. Nobody wants to have a hearing device seen outside, because somehow people don't mind wearing spectacles, but they have a great deal of problems when it comes to wearing a device, because for reasons best known to them. But I suspect it is partly because wearing a hearing device is associated with aging in many people's mind. So people don't like hearing aids as a whole. But there are other advantages. Basically, a totally implantable hearing device would eliminate a lot of feedback and background noise and improve sound quality. It also obviously avoids the occlusal effect. And you can actually have a lot of external lifestyle, activities like going swimming or going underwater, and you'd still be hearing. So it's obviously a big, big advantage if you can have a totally implantable device. And who are the potential beneficiaries? Practically anybody with a hearing loss, and the target population runs into millions of patients. It's been calculated that if you take any country in the world, about 10% of the population would have a significant or disabling hearing loss, as WHO calls it, and at least about 80% of all this is sensory neutral. So these are the patients who will be benefiting it. So basically, there are two models of totally implantable hearing devices which we have used. One is the Envoy S-Team, which is based on the piezoelectric principle. I'll talk about it. And the other one is electromagnetic principle device, which is the Autologix device, or Autologix Carina. Now, coming to the first one, the Envoy S-Team, it's a very interesting, fascinating device because of the concept. It's a piezoelectric coupling, as I already said. And what happens is you have two piezoelectric probes. One which is a sensor, and one which is a driver. The sensor senses or picks up the oscillator vibration. The interesting thing about this device is there's no microphone. The normal tympanic membrane and the ossicles act as a microphone. The logic or the philosophy being, why do you need a microphone when you have already got a microphone built into your ear? The middle ear is one of the best microphones that you can think of, because you have an excellent amplification happening in the middle ear, thanks to the way the middle ear transducer mechanism functions. So you have no need for another microphone. So the sound hits the drum, the oscillator chain vibrates, and this vibration is picked up by a piezoelectric crystal. And this is known as a sensor, and it is placed on the part of the oscillator chain which vibrates most, or the maximum oscillation. And this is the body of the incus, and very close to the head of the malleus, so very close to the joint. So the body of the incus is a place where the oscillator chain vibrates most. So you keep the sensor there, and it picks up the vibration. This is then taken, and it is converted it's actually amplified, and this amplification is then passed on to another piezoelectric crystal, which is placed on the head of stapes. And this is a driver. So this amplified energy is then transmitted via the stapes, which vibrates onto the inner ear, and you have an amplification of hearing. So it's a very interesting concept. So
Professor,
yes.
I have a few questions actually.
Yeah.
One by, again, Dr. Santosh.
Yes.
What is the quality of sound in a vibrant sound bridge?
In a sound bridge, excellent. It's very good. In a sound bridge, the quality of hearing is very good. Most patients who have been using hearing aids for a long time, when they switch over to a vibrant sound bridge, are quite happy, very happy with the quality of sound. Many of them feel that the quality is much better simply because there's no feedback at all, and they can hear very well very similar hearing, but minus the feedback. So the quality is very good, vibrant sound bridge.
Okay, please proceed.
Right. So now coming back to the Envoy Esteem. So basically the drum is used as the microphone, and then there's an analog amplification of the normal oscillator dynamics, and the piezoelectric transducer in the body senses, and another piezoelectric transducer on the staypiece drives the staypiece, and then we have but there's one big catch, and that's what I put in the box. So if you are picking up the amplification, you're amplifying it and putting it into the staypiece. So in between the two, there cannot be continuity. So you have to necessarily interrupt the oscillator chain, the normal oscillator chain, if you want to avoid a feedback. And therefore, the normal incus lenticular process is removed by laser, and then we have the. So this is so here is the external canal, the tympanic membrane, and from the tympanic membrane to the orbital malleus to the body of incus, and from the incus it's picked up by the sensor, which is a piezoelectric crystal, and then it goes on to the sound processor, which is under the skin, and this sound processor amplifies the energy that is coming in an analog fashion and drives it into another piezoelectric crystal, which is on the capitulum or the head of the staypiece, and drives the staypiece onto the cochlea. So this is the thing, and it gives an excellent hearing, and it's a normal hearing. So this is the components of the Envoy Esteem device, and everything is under the skin. Nothing is seen outside. So who are the people who are going to benefit? All patients have to be over the age of 18. It was FDA as well. And you have to have mild to moderate or even up to severe hearing loss. But the one condition is that the middle ear and the mastoid must be completely normal. There must not be any pathology in the middle ear or the mastoid. So you cannot have it in CSO, chronic otitis media. You cannot have it in otosclerosis. So if any conductive hearing loss is a contraindication. You have to have a pure cochlear loss. And a pure cochlear loss up to, let's say, even 60, 70, or even up to 80 decibels as a company claims, but certainly up to 60 to 70, I have seen myself. It gives excellent hearing in these patients. So all categories of severe, moderately severe to severe hearing loss. So that's the sort of criteria, audiometric criteria that you use, starting from about moderate to severe cochlear loss.
So Professor, there is a question from Amulya from Coorg.
Yeah.
Could you highlight regarding the post-operative follow-up of MEI?
Middle implants. Yes. The post-operative follow-up of these patients, generally, it's not very taxing. You do the surgery, you activate the device in about a month's time or so, and then the actual speech processor settings are done with the audiologist, and periodically they see them after a month, then usually after 3 months, and then after that, maybe whenever the patient needs. But certainly we request them to come in the first year once in 3 months, but after that at least once a year. So it's not a very taxing follow-up. And surgically, of course, the follow-up is, we take out the sutures and then see the patients, and there's usually like any other mastoid surgery. There's nothing special about it. And in the Envoy Esteem device, it's a little more taxing. I'm going to show you a small video of the surgery. As I said, this is just to say that the middle ear has to be normal. This is an actual patient. You can see the audiometry there. It's a fairly severe hearing loss. The normal, mastoid cellular system. As I said, any contraindication would be any middle ear pathology, be it otosclerosis or any infections. And so this is the surgery. It's a slightly involved surgery. It's a little more complicated than you do for a cochlear implant. Just like cochlear implant, you do a posterior tympanotomy. but this is a very generous posterior temporally. And you can see this corner that we take out a lot of this corner, and this corner is known as Mike's corner. And the more you take out, the more of the incus you expose. So having exposed the normal ossicular chain, the incus, now you have to interrupt the ossicular chain. So a laser is being used to fire and take out a portion of the long process and the lenticular process, thereby disarticulating the stapes. You can see there the capitulum. Now the sensor and the driver are fixed. The piezoelectric crystals are fixed. So this is done by initially using stabilizers, and now you can see one of the actual sensor going on to the incus, and the other one going on to the driver going on to the stapes. So once this is kept in position, then we apply a lot of bone cement, which is help to keep this in position. And then on the table, using laser Doppler vibrometry, we assess the hearing gain that the patient is getting, so you know that the system is functioning. And then the battery is kept in position. The battery employs heavy water and has a lifespan of about 6 to 10 years, depending on the usage of this device, after which it has to be replaced. Unfortunately, we did about 7 or 8 of these patients here in Chennai, but unfortunately now the company has more or less folded up. So we don't have the device available to us anymore, which is a pity really, because in my opinion, it is one of the most original developments in cochlear implants which came about, because the concept of using the middle ear as a microphone, I think, was brilliant. And I think it has a lot of applications in the future in cochlear implants too. We have to think of this concept in the cochlear implants as well. So the Autologix implant is also a fully implantable device, but it works by electromagnetic principle, and it is coupled to the incus or the stapes by a laser. Initially, a laser is used for drilling, and then this can be coupled to the incus. There's a small microphone which is kept over the mastoid bone, and the transducer is in contact with the body of the ossicular chain. And as I already said, it's electromagnetic coupling. And this is usually used for mild to moderate or severe cochlear loss in adults. It can also be used in patients with autosclerosis, unlike the Envoy device, but not in the presence of infection, obviously. And for profound hearing loss, it's not useful. So this more or less tells us about the choice that we have today in middle ear implants. But to summarize it briefly, the most successful middle ear implant, probably the most commonly used middle ear implant, active middle ear implant, is a vibrant sound bridge. The bone conduction devices today, we have a choice, and the active bone conduction device is the vibrant sound bridge. But we have the Sofono, the Ponto, and the Baha and the Baha Tract, which are also now available to us. So we have a whole choice of middle ear implants and bone conduction devices, which are helpful in conductive and mixed as well as in cochlear hearing loss.
Professor,
yes.
We have a question from Dr. Minesh Javekar, as well as from Dr. Neeraj. Can you give us about which bone cement you use?
Oh, it's an ionomer. It's a glass ionomer, which actually the company provides. It's a glass ionomeric cement, which is, you can't use a regular cement because it's toxic to the cochlea and also to the nerve. The glass ionomer is an excellent cement, which is non-toxic, and is very helpful to. It does the job. It fixes the piezoelectric probes in position without displacement. So the glass ionomer cement is what we use in this device.
Thank you, sir.
Now, coming to the neural processes, this is a different category, and we are using it now, moving on from the middle ear into the more interesting parts of the auditory system. So this is the neural process, I said already, represents a philosophical shift for us, because now from mending devices, we are now looking at replacing organs, and it's a bionic device. And of course, the most successful, uh, neural processes to date is the cochlear implant. Of course, a whole lot of neural processes have now come in. Apart from the basal implant, do not forget that our neurosurgical colleagues are now, working with deep brain stimulation, and it's a very, very successful implant now, the deep brain DBS, or the deep brain stimulation, because a lot of patients with resistant Parkinsonism are now benefiting from it. But let us not forget for a moment that the mother of all implants, it's all started with cochlear implants. So this is the first and successful, auditory neural implant that we have. And we have really gone places with cochlear implant. This is one of my favorite pictures of two implantees, one whispering to the other. I think this picture speaks volumes about what we've been able to achieve in the last 20 years or so. So basically, it's a system of electrodes which is surgically implanted into the cochlea. And as I said, it takes advantage of the existing tonotopicity of the cochlea. So the cochlea tonotopicity is two-dimensional. So you have a place and a pitch. So this is tremendously helpful for us, because when you keep an electrode, you can be quite selective in stimulating an area and stimulating a particular range of frequencies. And so this is and the big advantage, of course, is the cochlea at birth is adult size. So you don't have to be changing the electrodes, as the child grows. So who are the candidates? There's no doubt that the earlier you implant in a child who's born deaf, who's prelingual, the best age is the earliest age. And we are now looking at implanting children who are 1 year or even less. In fact, today, if you have a child who's about 8 or 9 months old and who's well developed, then will be an ideal candidate. What's important is not the chronological age. What is important is the weight of the baby. Generally speaking, we say if the baby is about 8 kilos or more, then take it up, because the anesthetic risks are much less. In babies less than that, the normal reflexes, the hemodynamic reflexes, may not be very well developed and could be posing challenges for the anesthetist. So generally, the earlier the better, and around 1 year or less is probably the best age. Certainly, we know that if up to the age of 2, if you intervene and restore hearing, then by the time the child is about 5 years old, then it would have caught up with its peers. So you will not be able to know in a mixed crowd who was the child who was born normal and with normal hearing, and who was the child who was born profoundly deaf and received a cochlear implant. So 2 is a magical age. After 2, they start lagging behind. Even up to 3, you can sometimes push it. But after that, there's no doubt that there'll always be a slight lag between the child and its normally hearing peers throughout its life. But certainly after the age of 6, arbitrary age, but 6 is probably the absolute upper limit. You go beyond that, the results are going to be bad, particularly with regard to speech and language development. All postlingual subjects, people who have heard, developed language, and lost hearing, no matter what, they will benefit from the implant. In fact, the oldest patient that I have operated upon was 86 years old when he was operated. He was a gentleman who lost his hearing due to presbycusis, and hearing aids were helping him. So with the implant at 86, he's still going strong. 10 years down the lane, he's now 96 and he's still using his implant. So, presbycusis is probably one of the biggest emerging indications for cochlear implantation. So all age groups who have received, who have developed language and hearing and who have lost hearing subsequently, whatever the cause, would qualify. But there is a small rider. The period of auditory deprivation. In other words, the period for which you have been deaf matters. So if you have been deaf for a very long time and you have not received any auditory stimulation, let's say for 20 years you have been profoundly deaf and you have not benefited from a hearing aid, so you have not heard anything at all 20 years, then there's a small question mark. Because the longer the period of auditory deprivation, the less the benefit, even in post-lingual subjects. So that's a small rider that you have to keep in your mind when you're counseling patients who are post-lingually challenged. But people who lost their hearing and who, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, they do benefit quite a bit, and many of them are very, very happy with the cochlear implant. So today, the indications are expanding. Initially, in the 90s, when we started with cochlear implantation, our indications were very simple. Somebody who had a profound or total hearing loss who would not benefit from a hearing aid, period. If they, we were not considering people with multiple handicaps, we were not considering people who had abnormal cochlears, dysplastic cochlears, people with auditory dyssynchrony or auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. We are not considering children with syndromic hearing loss. So a lot of these were considered as contraindications then. But slowly we have changed. We've had to swallow our own words, and we have today many new indications. Like certainly we are doing it in many of the dysplastic cochlears. We are doing it in dysynchrony, certainly. In many syndromic children, we are doing it. We are doing it in children with multiple handicaps. And of course, today is the era of bilateral simultaneous implantation. So what are the prerequisites for a cochlear implant? It's very simple. You need to have a cochlea. You need to have a cochlea which is connected. You need to have a cochlea with a cochlear nerve. So if you have an intact cochlea and a cochlear nerve connecting it, then that's definitely a cochlea where you can put in an implant. So the contraindication obviously would be where there's no cochlea or the cochlear nerve is absent, as in Michel deformities or cochlear nerve aphasia. Or, of course, there are other relative indications like, a child who's autistic, a child who's got severe mental retardation, and so on. But even then, I have had a few children whom there have been, questionable mental retardation or autism spectrum disorders, and we have implanted, and they have done well. In fact, auditory stimulation seems to help them for the brain. We do know from experience in adults that cognition is very much a function of hearing. And if hearing is given, then cognition also improves. So there is no doubt, that we have to keep that in mind before, but we certainly need to counsel them that these children may not be doing as well as the others. Now, one of the biggest tools that has come in helpful in recent times, maybe in the last decade or so, is the cortical auditory evoked potential. This is a tool which is very helpful because we can actually record from the brain of the auditory brain the waves reaching the auditory brain. So when you give in a deaf child, when you restore hearing and you give sound stimulus, you can record the waves, electrical waves or the EEG waves from the auditory brain. And this is known as the late latency responses or the cortical auditory evoked potentials. And the cortical auditory evoked potentials evolve with hearing. What do I mean? Now, if you have a child who is, newly born, as regards hearing. In other words, you have restored hearing today. This child may be 1 year old, but you have restored hearing today. It's newly born as far as the hearing is concerned. And if you record the cortical potentials, you get a certain wave. But if you record at 3 months, you have a different wave. At 6 months, you have a different wave. At 1 year, you have a fully formed wave. And so this means that you have actually a record of the evolving auditory brain, or you have a tool to study the maturation of the auditory brain. In other words, this is a wonderful biomarker of auditory maturation. And this is a very helpful thing. So when you are, doing this for cochlear implantees, it's interesting when you do it in children who are below 2, then the wave pattern of these children is very similar to the wave pattern of a normal hearing child. But after the age of 2, when you do and you record the cortical potentials, you can see subtle differences between these children. Even after 1 year of auditory experience, you will see differences between these children and children who are the so-called normally hearing children or the normally hearing peers. So that explains to us why this period of the neural plasticity becomes extremely important, and plastic brain is very important for us to get normal hearing and maturation. So there are challenges. We have a lot of challenges. I'll talk a little bit about it. You can have ossification following meningitis, or sometimes in adults, in very advanced motor sclerosis. You can have dysplastic cochleas like a incomplete partition type 2 or a Mondini deformity. You can have syndromic children. So all this becomes a problem. Now here is a peculiar situation where you have a large vestibular aqueduct. The child has become deaf, or an adult is deaf. Now here you can see the pulsation of the stapes and the pulsation of the round window, and the fluid coming out of it. So this tells us that this is a large vestibular aqueduct with high endolymphatic pressure. Today is the era of bilateral cochlear implantation. Why bilateral? Now we have 2 years, and there's a reason for it. We have 2 years. With 1 year, of course, you can hear somebody talking to you, and in one-to-one communication, you can very well manage quite well. But there are situations where 2 is better than 1, and it's interesting. It took us a lot of research and many years of research to actually, understand that 2 is better than 1. So what are the functions of the second ear? Now, when you have a profound deafness in one side or a single-sided deafness, then you have a head shadow thrown by the head. So if you have somebody whispering softly on that side or talking softly on that side, you will not hear. This is the head shadow effect. Secondly, if somebody is calling you from behind or above or below you, then you do not know the direction of the sound. To make out the direction or the directionality of hearing, you need to have binaural hearing. And third, perhaps the more important of the lot, is a squelch effect, which is simply known as the cocktail party effect. Suppose you're in a cocktail party and everybody is talking, and you just want to listen to Mr. X, who is a very important man. You just want to listen to him alone, to the exclusion of all the others. You need 2 years. In other words, when there's a lot of ambient noise and the signal to noise ratio is bad, to pick up the signal, you need to have both ears excellent hearing. So therefore, when you have a bilateral profound hearing loss, it stands to reason that when you restore hearing in both ears simultaneously, these children have an advantage, and they do far better than the child in whom you're given only one side hearing. So,
Professor, we have a question, if you don't mind. Can we take this? Question is from Dr. Amulya. What is the success rate in patients with auditory neuropathy?
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Neuropathy is not a single disease, it's a spectrum. So what is the problem there? The problem is that they are hearing, but they are not discriminating. They are hearing sounds, but the discrimination is very poor. So typically, these are people who have a normal cochlea, at least as far as the hair cells go. But the problem starts from the hair cell to the neuronal synapse, the junction. So that is where there is a firing which is happening irregularly. In other words, there is a dysynchronous firing. And this is shown by a normal autoacoustic emission, but an abnormal BERA. Because BERA, contrary to what we all think, is not a tool of hearing assessment. BERA is a tool of assessment of synchrony. So when there is a dysynchronous firing, the bearer is no longer useful. It cannot be recorded. So there are basically two types of auditory synchrony. The so-called peripheral type and the central type. The peripheral type is fortunately the more common, where you have the problem mainly in the the cochlea, where you have the hair cell to neuronal synapse or junction. This is where the dyssynchrony is. But you can also have a central dyssynchrony, which is more central, happening in the auditory pathways in the central nervous system, and that's uncommon. Now, a cochlear implant will obviously be very helpful in the peripheral type. It may not be very helpful in the central type. So the next question is, how do you make out whether it's peripheral or central? That's the next question is going to be asked. Well, there are tools. Usually in a central dyssynchrony, there are other associated problems, and this can be picked up by an MRI. Whereas an MRI is completely normal in a peripheral type. And the other tool that we employ is an EABR, or electrically evoked auditory brainstem response, where you can actually stimulate the cochlea electrically and record the brainstem responses. When you have a peripheral type, this electrical stimulation will cause synchrony and you can get a record. So this is a helpful tool for you to actually differentiate a peripheral from a central type. And therefore, the answer to the question, short answer is, yes, it's very helpful if you have a peripheral type of auditory synchrony. It's not very helpful if you have a central type of auditory synchrony. Okay?
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Right. Now, coming back to the bilateral cochlear implants. So as I said, we have the squelch effect, where you can pick up the signal from a lot of ambient noise. And finally, there's a very interesting phenomenon of something which happens in the brainstem, where if you have X amount of energy coming from the right ear and Y amount of energy coming from the left ear, in the brainstem, it's not X plus Y, but X plus Y plus another factor. In other words, there is a little additional gain in the brainstem. And this is because of a very interesting circuitry in the trapezoid body, which actually augments the energy in the hearing when combined from both ears. So the sum total of 2 years is not just the numerical addition of the 2 years, but an additional extra factor. So all these are advantages of bilateral hearing, binaural hearing. And when you do a bilateral simultaneous cochlear implantation, you give the patient a binaural hearing. But now you have to next differentiate. It's a little more complicated. Differentiate between binaural and bilateral hearing. They are different things. So when you have, let's say, you've done an implant in 1 year for a child, and for various reasons, maybe monetary reasons or whatever, they could not do a bilateral implant. So then they come back to you and you do another implant at the opposite year whenever they have the money. We know from experience that if you can do this within, let's say, 5 years or 6 years or even up to 7 years, you can get a binaural advantage. But if there's a big gap, let's say 10, 15 years gap between one side and the other side, then you can restore hearing another year. You have bilateral implants, a hearing, but it's not binaural hearing. What do I mean? You get over the head shadow effects. To some extent, you can also get directionality, but the squelch effect and summation are missing because the integration doesn't happen after a long gap. So this is bilateral hearing, and it's not binaural hearing. So this is a very subtle concept that we have to understand. And the difference, of course, is the time period, the time lag. So this we have to keep in mind when we are doing sequential implantation. That is one side first and the other side after some time. Now, the next interesting challenge, and I think in a way, defines one of the future directions in which cochlear implantation is going, is the hybrid implant or the electroacoustic stimulation, or simply called EAS. Now, here is an audiogram. This is a typical ski slope audiogram. You have excellent hearing in the lower frequencies, but comes 100,000 and then suddenly it drops. So the mid and high frequencies, practically there is no hearing. But this is a candidate who will not tolerate a hearing aid. They will bitterly complain about a hearing aid. The reason being, if you give a hearing aid for him, he will find that the lower frequencies are unbearable because there's too much of amplification. And the higher frequencies are not adequate because the device is not amplifying enough. And no matter how much we tweak the frequencies in a hearing aid, there's only so much we can get. So these patients will never be happy with the hearing aid, and they'll always be, missing out on things and complaining about it. So the next challenge is how do we get them. So if you're going to help them, you have to think about a solution where you preserve the patient's own hearing in the lower frequencies where he has good hearing. And in the higher frequencies where he has no hearing, you have to supplement with bionic hearing. In other words, you have to marry the bionic ear with this patient's own ear. That's a challenge because, in the 90s, when we were doing implants, our only aim was, like Rambo, to put a piece of metal into the cochlea. So, we went about drilling into the cochlea, doing nice big cochleostomies and, shoving this electrode into the cochlea and, coming out with a very triumphant look on our faces. But that's not the era today. Today is the era of soft surgery, where you want to introduce an implant into the inner ear without disturbing the fine or very, very fine ultrastructure of the cochlea. In other words, preserving the cochlear ultrastructure and introducing the implant into the scala vestibuli without changing either the dynamics of the pressure of the cochlea or the very fine ultrastructure of the cochlea. And if this can be done, then you can certainly achieve what you want to do. And remember, the cochlea is very conveniently laid out for us, where the higher frequencies are closer to us than the low frequencies. Lower frequencies are the apex, and the higher frequencies are the base. So as you approach the cochlea from the base to the apex, you are slowly approaching approaching the regions of the higher frequencies to mid frequencies, and finally accessing the lower frequencies. So therefore, in a situation like this, it's possible for us to use an implant which is shorter, which will only cover the range of the high and mid frequencies, but preserve the patient's own cochlea in the apex in the ultrastructure. So right now, the indications is really a person who's got mild to moderate loss in the low frequencies, where you may be able to use a hearing aid. But after 1 kilohertz, the severe sloping, profound sensory hearing loss, as is shown in the audiograms here. So the surgery is a soft surgery. So this is just to show you how a cochlear implant is done in this situation where you want to hear. So we do a posterior taphotomy just like we do for any cochlear implant, and you have a very nice view. Now you can use the round window, or you can do a cochleostomy, a very soft cochleostomy, where you just expose the endosteum and then very gently open it, just like you do for a stapes surgery. But most surgeons would prefer the round window because it's much softer and you're in the right compartment and you can do. But the electrodes have to be very specially designed. They have to be very soft electrodes and they have to be very, very fine. And here you can see me using one of these soft electrodes, special design, and threading it through a bit of fascia. And usually a small incision is made, a very fine round window myringotomy is done. And with the complete steroid cover and often in a steroid lake, the electrode is introduced. The electrode is introduced very, very slowly. Generally, you take at least about 2 to 3 minutes to do an insertion because every bit of electrode which goes in causes an increase in the dynamics of the cochlea. The hydrodynamic pressure goes up inside the cochlea. So you have to allow for egress of the fluid to equalize the pressure. So you have to do this very, very gently, very patiently, go in, and once you have reached that, then the fascia is then used as a cuff to seal off the meningotomy that you made so that there's no leakage of endolymph lymph. So you get a watertight seal. So this is done very softly. It's a very soft surgery, as you said. And once that is done, it's a short electrode, which is usually less than 20 millimeters. Because 20 millimeters corresponds to 1 kilohertz mark in the cochlea. So usually it is less than 20 millimeters or about 20 millimeters long. And the patient has to have stable hearing. So basically, you have stable hearing, which is you monitored over a period of time. You can't do it in a patient who's been having fluctuating hearing or progressive hearing loss. So once this is done, then you can use this. So this is one candidate who's received the AS.
Yes,
he's a musician, and for him, music is his life. So he, for music, cochlear implants are awful, because they do not really help with fine structure processing as well as the cochlea. But in the EAS, when you preserve a little bit of the patient's own hearing, the situation is drastically changed. They can perceive music very well. In fact, this is a musician who had it, but I also did it for a music teacher in one of the American schools here, and she still continues to teach music to all her students. So music appreciation is one very big advantage of hybrid hearing or electroacoustic. So let's go on to the future of cochlear implants a little bit. There are a lot of things which are going to be happening. We are going to have much better surgical techniques, I believe. Robotic surgery is definitely, already being worked up in many centers. Hair cell regeneration is a dream for us, most of us. And a totally implantable cochlear implant has been done already by Rob Briggs in Melbourne. He's done at least, I think, 6 or 7 patients, and still trials are going on. So a lot of things are happening. But we have a lot of tools which are now coming in, which are helping us to study this better. And we have PET CT, O2 PET scans, particularly with oxygen PETs. We have near infrared spectroscopy, or NIRS, which is a very useful tool for studying the auditory cortex. So a lot of tools are now coming in. And one of the fascinating works, which to me is from the Mass Eye Institute at Harvard, where Stankovic, Konstantina, is a very brilliant young lady who is developing a prototype for a totally implantable cochlear implant. Now, what she has done is she used a piezoelectric sensor, borrowing ideas from the experience with the Envoy ST, and implanted it just beyond the drum, so that the drum is still used as a vibrator, but the microphone is actually from the middle ear. And a chip is charged wirelessly by a smartphone. So the smartphone charges, every time you use a phone, it charges the chip, and this then powers the implant. And she also says, why do we need a battery when the cochlea itself is a battery? It's a very revolutionary idea, and I find it very fascinating, because she says that we produce so much electricity inside the cochlea, remember? So why do we need to be having an external source of battery? Let's use the biological battery. And I was very interested when I visited her lab that they had a cat who had been used as a test subject, and they had tapped the electricity from the cochlea of the cat to power a transistor chip. So this is really fascinating. But that's the future. That's going to be happening in the future. The other exciting area now is the optogenetics, cochlear optogenetics, where instead of using wires which conduct electricity, we are going to be probably using light as a source of transmission. And light evoked nerve impulses by using certain materials to sensitize the neurons, and then using specific wave lasers, we may be able to actually allow transmission of the sound impulse as much quicker rate in the neurons than compared to electrical stimulation. So this is again a very promising field. We are also going to be using cochlear implants in the future for delivering substances into the cochlea. So this could be neurotrophic factors, this could be growth factors, steroids, or you could also be using adenoviruses to deliver specific genes. So the cochlear implant may not only be stimulating the cochlea, but may also be a drug delivery system because it's a tube. You know, you can use it for giving drugs, and this is another fascinating possibility in the future. Now, the other very interesting thing is, you know, why do you need an implant if you can make the cochlea regenerate itself? Now, if you have a pigeon and you give orthotoxic drugs to the pigeon, let's say you give aminoglycosides to the pigeon, you may have a deaf pigeon. But a week later, the deaf pigeon will once again be a hearing pigeon. And the reason why this happens is because in the birds, the supporting cells can once again regenerate hair cells and connect with the cochlea. Whereas in mammals, this is lost. This ability to regenerate the hair cells has been lost during evolution by the mammals. And therefore, if you can once again, you know, kickstart this, you may be able to regenerate the cochlea. So it's a very fascinating line of thought. And we now know that there is a protein called the notch protein, which inhibits the supporting cells and prevents it from forming the hair cells. So if you can inhibit the notch protein, then you can take away this inhibition and make the supporting cell once again develop the hair cell. And this is where there's an enzyme which has been identified, which is one of the gamma secretase. And if this enzyme is thought to play a very key role in this notch protein, which is inhibiting the whole process. So drugs which inhibit this enzyme are now being worked upon. And if you can get a drug which can inhibit the gamma secretase, which I'm sure will happen in the near future, then you have a whole new train of thought where you're going to be kickstarting the patient's own supporting cells to regenerate hair cells and give back hearing, just like in birds, rather than putting in external implants and giving them hearing. So we may, who knows, you know, in the future we may not have cochlear implants. We may be using implants only to deliver drugs into the cochlea. So this is a very interesting train of thought. So this is just to show you the electron micrograph of a damaged inner ear and then recovering after drug treatment. The other area of development which is happening is what is known as close field electroporation, where BDNF, we all know that BDNF is a very important factor which is released by the brain in whenever there is any stress on the brain. So in fact, whenever we have any fear or shocking news or any trauma to the brain, the substance released which helps to soothe the whole thing is the BDNF, which is known as a brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And in the cochlea, the BDNF expressing genes can be stimulated, and this will encourage the nerve fibers to grow towards the cochlear implant and reduce the distance from the cochlear implant to the neurons. And this may probably help with better pitch definition. So this is just to show you the particular process. This is the neurons and implant somewhere there, but you can see now the auditory nerves which are going towards the implant. And this is the last bit I want to tell you about the future. This is one of the most fascinating papers I've ever seen. And in fact, I had the pleasure of giving them the Best Paper Award in the Pulitzer Society. There's a very young lady from Kyoto University who has developed this artificial piezoelectric membrane. So when she implants this membrane into a deafened cat, and she produces sound, she's able to record brainstem responses. So in other words, this acts as an artificial cochlea or artificial, hearing epithelium in the cochlea. So this is yet another direction in which we go. Now, finally, I want to say a little bit about the brainstem implant. I hope we are not too late, but I'll just spend.
No, we're not too late, sir. There is a huge number of audience actually seeing you. More than 3,000 people are watching you now, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So basically, the brainstem implant is an option when we can't do a cochlear implant. So we may not be able to do a cochlear implant if there's no cochlea, obviously, or if the cochlea is disconnected. In other words, the cochlea is present, but there's no cochlear nerve, and therefore it's not connected to the auditory system. So in this situation, as I said at the very beginning of my talk, we have the possibility that we go a step further beyond and then once again restore auditory stimulation. And obviously the next station would be either the cochlear nerve or the brainstem. In fact, initially, when you look at the history of the evolution of implants, the initial attempts were all made about cochlear nerve stimulation. But this is not very successful because we are not able to take advantage of the tonotopicity in the cochlear nerve, as it's very, very complicated. So therefore, the next logical station to access is the brainstem. And brainstem is very conveniently located for us because the cochlear nucleus in the brainstem, fortunately for us, is a superficial structure. It's not deep into the substance of the brainstem. It's accessible from the surface. It's on the surface in the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. It's again accessible for us. So because it is accessible for us, we can keep a chip in the lateral recess and stimulate the cochlear nucleus. The cochlear nucleus is in two parts. There is a ventral and a dorsal cochlear nucleus. And basically, you can see here, the ventral is again divided into an anterior and a posterior ventral. And since we are accessing from the front, we invariably access the ventral nucleus and a varying amount of dorsal nucleus, depending on our depth of insertion, which is relatively blunt in the brainstem. But the dorsal nucleus is important because most of the high frequencies are represented in the dorsal nucleus. And high frequency hearing, we know, is very important, particularly for consonants. If you want to be understanding consonants in speech, you really need high frequency information. So the brainstem implant, one of the biggest challenges is to be accessing the dorsal cochlear nucleus. So what are the indications? Classically, a brainstem implant is done in a person, adult, who has had an NF2 and has a bilateral surgery for vestibular schwannomas. So in other words, bilaterally disconnected cochleas. So in this situation, the patients benefit from an implant kept in the brainstem in the cochlear nucleus. That is the classical indication, as when House and Hitzelberger did it. In fact, interestingly, they did it even before a cochlear implant was done. So an ABI preceded a cochlear implant historically. But the results are variable in adults. Most of them will get some auditory, and in fact, they will all use it because it will help in their lip reading. But very few patients actually develop sufficient hearing where they can have completely, totally auditory hearing and have open speech understanding. So most of them would actually be using it as an aid to lip reading, especially in NF2 patients in adults. So this is the classical indication. And then, of course, other indications like bilateral temporal bone fractures, which I must say is very, very rare. We all talk about it, but it's very, very rare. And bilateral totally ossified cochlea. In fact, just today, I received a call from a child from Vietnam. They had a bilateral, completely ossified cochlea. Unfortunately, had normal cochlea 3 months earlier. And by the time the surgeon could go in to implant in 3 months' time, it's complete whiteout. the whole cochlea is gone, so you're not able to put an implant in. So that's the sort of indication when they do very well actually with the brainstem implantation. Now, so this is a classical situation where you have a bilateral, vestibular schwannoma, and this is the topography that we need to think about. Now, you have this, the lateral recess, and you can see through that the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus is in many ways the hero because the choroid plexus gives us the actual location of the lateral recess. And during surgery, one of the ways we identify the lateral recess is by looking at the choroid plexus and probing the choroid plexus area. Also, sometimes, even choroid plexus is not very clear, we may ask the anesthesiologist colleague to do a positive Valsalva during surgery. And when they do a Valsalva, you see the CSF coming out, or egress of CSF, that tells us that that's the location that we're looking for. The other factor we think about is this vein. This is very commonly seen is a straight vein, and this leads invariably to the cochlear nucleus. If you have normally the 7th, 8th, and the 9th cranial nerves form a triangle. So if your 8th nerve is missing, then you have the 7th and the 9th, then you can more or less extrapolate and see where the 8th nerve is. That will also be an additional landmark for you to access the cochlear nucleus in the brainstem. The villain of the piece is the flocculus, and the flocculus is variable in size. And sometimes it can be so large that it completely covers the lateral recess, and then you have quite a job dissecting it out, and this can be a troublesome. This happens in about a third of these patients. So, the flocculus is a villain, the choroid plexus is the hero, or the heroine, whatever you want to say. But, it definitely, the choroid plexus is a problem. So what we have done in our team is we've actually classified the choroid plexus. We put a grading for the choroid plexus, which is now internationally accepted. And this grading will help us to, grade the degree of difficulty of surgery even before you start probing the area. So this is an intraoperative picture which just shows the nerve exit zone, and you can see the implant going in. Generally, the 9th cranial nerve is a nerve that we follow to the lateral recess. That is a very, very helpful area to do. So a brief surgical clip just to show. This is the incision that is more or less now standard for our center. And we do a small craniectomy or a craniotomy. In fact, nowadays we make a small little window and put back the bone in children. It's very helpful to do that. So once you've done that, you open up the dura and open up the cisterns, let out the CSF. Once this is done, the entire cerebellum will retract very nicely, and you see the lower cranial nerves. Very gently, the biarachnoid is dissected out, and you can now see the choroid plexus, which is what we are looking at. And the choroid plexus is very, very helpful because once you know where the choroid plexus is, you then know where the lateral plexus is, and you can see the CSF coming out. So nowadays we have also test electrodes which can be put in, especially with the metal system. That's a very big advantage. But even otherwise, you can put the implants in, and it is generally, very gently pushed into the lateral recess without much pressure. And this part of the step is a relatively blind procedure. And as I said, the deeper access will help you to access the dorsal cochlear nucleus to a large extent. And certainly the ventral cochlear nucleus is invariably accessed. So this will help us to seat it. Once it is nicely inserted, then we keep a little bit of muscle or a bit of gel foam and keep it in position. And after that, intraoperative testing is done because you want to make sure that you're in the right location. This is a very important area. It's a VIP neighborhood. So that's a little bit of soft tissue going in there. It's a VIP neighborhood. Plus, the brain is constantly pulsating and trying to displace the electrode out, and you don't want it to come out. And you create the neighborhood, you don't want to be stimulating the wrong neighbors. You want to be stimulating the right person, which is the cochlear nucleus. So, you want to test intraoperatively, uh, make sure that you're in the right position. And this is done by an EABR, about which we already talked about before, electrically evoked auditory brainstem response. Remember, I talked about it when we were talking about the auditory dyssynchrony. The same setup is used intraoperatively to test that we are in the right place. So you stimulate the cochlear nucleus and record the brainstem responses, and you get 1 to 3 waves. And these waves will tell us that we are in the auditory area. So once we know that, then of course it's closed. We give a healing period, which usually is from anything from 4 to 6 weeks for the whole thing to heal up. Post-operative CT scan is done to make sure we are in the right position. And then, of course, it is switched off. The million-dollar question is, in congenital absence of cochlea in children with Michel deformity, where we do a pediatric ABI, the big question was, does it work? Can they hear? So our experience is we are still gathering. Don't forget, there are very few centers in the world which have experience which is substantial. In our own center, we are now approaching about 50 pediatric brainstem implants. And it's a big number because not many centers in the world have that kind of numbers. Most of them are 3, 4, 5. A couple of centers have got large numbers like 50 and so on. So we have to pool our resources together, pool the information together to get information. But there's no doubt that they can hear. So how do we know that they're responding, they're benefiting? So this is Justin, 2 years post ABI. See, the important bit is an that's the prosody of speech. And prosody of speech, which is the non-verbal aspects of speech, are what tells you that they are hearing their own voice. And this is what gives the quality of normalcy to speech. And this is one of the best indications that you can have that there is a feedback, that they are actually listening to their own voice and modulating their own voices. So there is no doubt that they can hear. And we also have now established that we can record, just like in cochlear implants, in brainstem implants also, our group has been able to demonstrate the cortical auditory evoked potentials. You remember I told you it's an excellent biomarker for auditory maturation. So in ABI, pediatric ABI also, we have been able to demonstrate the maturation of auditory cortex. And this is conclusive evidence physiologically that these are not only hearing, but their auditory brain is maturing. Now, the important thing is the time scale. In a cochlear implant, this happens very fast. In 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, you see the whole thing. In an ABI, this is in slow motion. It takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So what happens in 1 year in a cochlear implant may take about 3 years, 4 years in an ABI. So you have to have a much longer, scheme or a much longer plan for rehabilitation of these children. Very often, for 2, 3, 4 years. Then only you can get the full benefit. So this is going on for 3 to 4 years. The process of learning and maturing of the auditory cortex is still ongoing, even at the end of 2 or 3 years or 4 years. So this is what we have to keep in mind when we're talking about this. A lot of developments are happening in the field of ABIs too. We tried penetrating implants. The reason for this is simple. The tonotopicity in the cochlea, I told you, is 2-dimensional. Unfortunately, tonotopicity in the brainstem, the cochlear nucleus, is 3-dimensional. So it's not only on the surface, but it also goes into the depth of the brainstem. So just by stimulating the surface, you may not be able to access all the frequencies. So the thought was that why don't we use penetrating electrodes, which can go into the cochlear nucleus, into the brainstem, and stimulate the deeper parts of the brainstem, cochlear nucleus. So we tried that, but there was some potential, but there's not definitely having any big advantages. It's not very statistically significant differences. So now that is more or less out of the window. There are also some schools about sleeper implants. So if you're doing an NF2 patient, bilateral, the first side when you remove the tumor, you put in an ABI. Don't keep it there. The second side when you remove, you can then stimulate the first side, ABI, see if it functions. And we're also now looking at bilateral ABIs. So we are looking at just like in cochlear implants, but not simultaneous. Obviously, you can't touch the brain simultaneously on both sides. So you do one side and sequentially think about the second side after a few months or maybe 6 months to 1 year. You can do the other side too. Endoscopic ABI is the other development which is happening in pediatric brain implants, where you make a small little window, retrosigmoid, and use an endoscope to access and introduce the implants. It has advantages because in a small baby who's 2 years old, you don't want to make big craniotomies. You want to avoid it. And obviously using an endoscope is a big advantage in this location. So what's happening? What next? What's the future? Already midbrain implants are being done. Thomas Lennars in Hanover has been working with midbrain implants. And he told me that he's got about 3 patients in whom he's put in implants. And the second generation midbrain implants have now come in, where 2 implants are going into the inferior colliculus and stimulating the inferior colliculus. So it's fascinating because when you have a very distorted midbrain due to a very large vestibular schwannoma, you may not be able to find the cochlear nucleus. So in that situation, accessing the midbrain makes a lot of sense because it's relatively virgin territory. It's not been disturbed by the tumor. So you can go there and put your implants in. And, cortical implants, auditory cortical implants, will it happen? Who knows? It may happen. I don't know whether my time I'll see, but I certainly think Janki will see it, in his time. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are in a very fascinating period. Sometimes I really envy, the youngsters. I really envy the youngsters. Not because of the youth, but because I think they're going to see fascinating things in their lifetime. I don't know whether I'll be around to see that, but I certainly hope to be around to see at least some of it. But a lot of fascinating developments are happening in this field. And we are going to be seeing in the next 10, 20, 30 years, tremendous, developments, which will not only make the field of hearing better, but I think it will also help us to understand the brain better. The entire Bayesian concept of brain function is that the probability of an event happening is very much related to the events which shaped the event to happen in the past. And this is very much going to be happening in the field of auditory implantation. So we have now wonderful solutions for a variety of hearing devices. So much so that I think you can look at a person with a hearing challenge, who's hearing challenged, and look at them honestly and tell them that today no hearing loss should be left unattended. And every hearing loss is curable. Every hearing loss, no matter what, is curable, no matter what the cause. It can be addressed and it can be cured. So these are exciting times, ladies and gentlemen. It's exciting times. And I think a lot of excitement is still going to come in the near future. Thank you for your patience. Thank you all.
So Professor Mohan sir, it was really a astounding speech. I'm really grateful to you for having accepted our invitation. And believe me, people will be spellbound and no words to actually describe your lecture. It was actually enthralling, and you have thrown light to the future as well as the present, what is happening, and the revolution which is going to happen in the future. I really thank you, sir. I'm sure the audience would have really enjoyed. This is the most commendable speech I've really heard on, implantable hearing devices. And I've been receiving a lot of comments about it. I will post it to you as soon as I get all the consolidated comments, as well as the number of viewers who have watched this. Just to make one announcement, with your kind permission, we have a grand rounds on 25th, again by the Ahmedabad team. So please stay with us on 25th. We are going to come again with Alembic. And we have received so many comments about today's program of Professor Mohan Kameswaran from various parts of the world, right? From Africa, from America, from from the Far East, and so many other countries. And I'm sure that everybody, I've also posted the email ID of Professor Mohan Kameswaran, which is MERFMK30@yahoo.com. I've already posted that. And in case you want to, go for a fellowship or, bring some patients from anywhere, any part of the world, he is the person, he is the man in the implantable hearing device programs. So thank you very much, sir. And I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm to stay tuned with us for 2 hours and non-stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janki. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Stop, right? Just go Zoom.
That's more. Stop.